It is currently September 16th, so I am going to go to a cafe. I don't know what cafe, but I'm going to try to get out of the house because I just need a change of scenery. I've been here stuck in the apartment all day and I'm sick of it. So I've been working on my ship story. I kind of want to just comb through the draft one last time. I just need to move on from this story, but I can't move on unless I know the story's in the right shape. So look how poofy my hair is. I just washed it. I am in a conference room. I'll show you. This is like a mini conference room that my apartment complex has. It's the 17th of September and I am here to just trying to continue writing. Yesterday when I was at Panera Bread, I think I worked on like 4 chapters. It seems that most times when I sit down to, most times these days when I sit down to work on my ship story, I do 4 chapters and then I kind of feel like I'm at a good stopping place, or you know, I'm out of time basically to work on the story. Okay, we're moving on to chapter 45. There are 63 chapters in total. So, oh, we're like, that makes it sound like we're 2/3 of the way through. I'm on page 332. It is 6:11 p.m. My husband is on his way home soon, and then once he comes home, we'll figure out what we're doing for dinner. Maybe we'll go out somewhere. You know, since we've come back, since we were gone all of August, we've eaten out so many times just because, like, there's just been so much to deal with, that, like, if there was one thing we could take off of our plates, it's putting stuff onto our own plates. Do you ever feel when you're writing that, like, I don't know, some aspect of the story you're telling, I don't know, if you're not the person to tell this story, you're not the person to get these details right. Like, for example, I was not alive in the 1800s where part of my story takes place. I can only do research into these things, into what life was like, into what certain countries and societies were like in the 1800s Europe. Does it ever just feel like the research is too much? All the things you do not know are just too much. What it is it instills doubt. It instills doubt in me, where, like, I almost don't even want to finish doing the research or write the story because, like, it gets overwhelming. Like, there's a lot going on, a lot of stuff that I never expected, and I don't know how to incorporate this into my story because my story is already written. I'm basically just setting a scene that was in one place. Now I'm setting it in Barcelona, and it's just one scene, okay? It's not the whole story. But, you know, it's like, I want to get it right, obviously. I don't know how to explain it. The only solution, it seems, is to push forward anyway. Do the research and do what you can. Hey, so it's Tuesday, September 21st. It's almost 6 p.m. And for the last hour and a half or so, I've been sitting in the conference room of my apartment complex, listening to some music and working on chapter 48 of Pitchfork. I mentioned that I was stuck on this chapter because I changed the location and I had to do a lot of research just to kind of get an idea of, like, what's going on in this location at this time. And the research was a bit overwhelming, if only because, like, you kind of get to a point where it's like, am I really the best person to write this story? Like, am I really capable? You know, but I was just like, I stepped away from it for a bit, and then I was thinking about it a bit later, and I was like, you know, I should just push through it, put details here and there where I can, but don't obsess over it, because the whole goal of this is just to kind of comb through it and get it to a good place and then move on. So now on to chapter 49, which takes place in a completely different location than the last one. And it's switching back to Amber's perspective. So yeah, baby steps. It's Friday, September 24th. I'm leaving Barnes & Noble now. I've been here for 2 hours. And for the last like hour, honestly, I feel like in that 2 hours I've been through a roller coaster of emotions. Because I was starting to get into writing, working on Pitchfork chapter 49. And then I realized there's a plot point that I have to go back and add in. Not a plot point, a scene that I took out because it didn't feel like it was in the right place, but I kept forgetting to look for a place to add it back in. And so I'm like, okay, today I'll go and try to find a place to add it back in, but I couldn't find a good place because where I wanted to put it was kind of too late in the story of a place to put it. So I think when I finish this draft, I'll have to go back and kind of isolate that scene and figure out a good place to put that scene so that plot line throughout the story tracks. So anyway, in the middle of doing that, I started to think of my dad, and it made me really sad. So I was like, well, I have to kind of sit with this feeling. I can't just try to forget and ignore it just because I'm in a public place. And that's what I've been trying to do, is instead of like when I feel sad, instead of just like pushing it away and trying to distract myself right away, I try to just sit with the feeling and acknowledge it for what it is. So I usually look at pictures of my dad, which of course just led to me crying, like tearing up in the middle of a Barnes and Noble. Not in the middle, I was actually against the wall in the corner. But there were people like within view of me. And so I started like tearing up, and my eyes are watering, my nose is running, and I'm like, oh gosh. I don't want people, if I wipe my nose, I don't want people thinking I have COVID or something. But anyway, nobody even noticed because I tried to keep it very tame. But anyway, so after I sat with those feelings for a few minutes, then I went to distract myself with like funny things online and feel good things online. But then I was just like, you know what, I don't really want to be here, but you know what, let me just try to get back into the story, refocus, and try to get some work done, because I really do just want to finish this book by the end of the month, which I don't think is going to happen unless I have a couple of days where I just sit down and crank it out. It might go into the beginning of October. I mean, like, which is fine. But then I just was like, you know, just more, the longer I sat there, the more I was just like, I really don't feel like being here right now. I kept picturing myself at home, watching TV, just kind of zoning out and relaxing. By the way, my mom recommended a show to me called Ghosts. It's on HBO Max, but it's actually a BBC show. It's about this couple who, they inherit this house, like a mansion, an old mansion in England. And it's full of all these ghosts, but it's not at all a scary thing. It's a comedy. It's so funny. I love the show. And the whole time they're trying to renovate this mansion to turn it into a hotel. And it's so funny because I haven't told you like really much about my hotel story, but I will say that this show in some ways is similar to Hotel Story in just that it has to do with a hotel and it has to do with ghosts and it's not a horror. So maybe that's one of the reasons I'm loving this show so much, but it's also just really funny and endearing, and it's got a vibe to it, which is perfect for this time of year, you know. And now I'll probably either finish listening to my audiobook as I drive home. I'm listening to This Coven Won't Break, which is the sequel to These Wishes Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. Or I'm going to call my mom. But what I'll probably do is listen to my audiobook and then call my mom when I get home. It is Friday, October 1st, and I took today off from work just like I did last year to go to a cafe and write, and basically just to make it a me day. I started this morning with a therapy session, which was a wonderfully emotional way to start the day. I just spent the last 2.5 hours working at a cafe, one of my favorite cafes, and I basically just read through, I think, 3 chapters of Pitchfork, and then I was going to go to this restaurant for a lunch break. It's like 2:30 in the afternoon now, but that restaurant is closed. It said, like, due to the unreliability and staffing. That restaurant has one of the best, like, meals I've ever had. It's basically like a open-faced, like, Thanksgiving sandwich. It's so good. But anyway, so I just popped across the street. I looked for restaurants on Google Maps, and I saw the word fattoush. Is that how you pronounce it? And I was like, I'm going there. Mediterranean. I got a falafel and spinach salad. I can't really show you without tipping it over, but it smells amazing. So I just wanted to say, like, how before in my vlogs I've talked about how
it takes like 45 minutes to an hour sometimes to get into the headspace. And like once you start your writing session, to get into the headspace to like feel like you're really writing. I think part of that is, especially if it's been a few days. Ooh, candlepin bowling. That was a squirrel moment, huh? Like squirrel. Especially if it's been a few days since your last writing session, which for me today it has. Part of getting into the headspace is remembering where you are in the story, and like all the details and everything that happened in the story thus far that led you to this point in the story. Like all the decisions characters made, all the things that have happened, all the places they've been, etc. When it's been a few days since you've written, you kind of start to forget the details, but it takes a few minutes. But like as you start to like read through the story and remember these details, everything starts to kind of fit into place in your mind, and you start to become really familiar with the story, and it just like clicks. And that's part of the like sinking, like becoming immersed in the story, like sinking into it and like really understanding the story where you are right now. Even if you don't remember all the details in the story, it just feels like you do. You just feel so in tune with the story. And the caffeine hits. I had a chai latte. So the caffeine hits, about that point in, and I feel this sort of anxiousness in a good way. It's actually like a good kind of anxiousness where like I can't help, or I can't wait to just keep writing. Even if I'm currently writing, I don't want it to stop, Like it's this anxious excitement. It feels really good. And I'm sitting relatively still, like I'm just like reading my computer screen. My fingers are moving and whatnot, but ultimately I'm not really, most of my body is really still. So being so still but feeling so anxiously excited, and having the caffeine sort of working through you, and also your mind just being really immersed in the world of the story. Like you're not even seeing your computer, you're seeing the story in your head. And that's where I got to today reading through Pitchfork. It's great. I just got to part 3. So where I finished, I made a few adjustments to a story a character was telling in the story, a story within a story. And it's funny because the story the character was telling was about stuff that happened earlier in the story. I don't know how to explain it, but it's basically a scene where a lot of things are coming full circle. And so I wrote that chapter. That's where I finished off, and it just felt so good to write that. And also just to hit part 3. Like I've got like I think 120 or 30 or 40 pages left in the story. It's like a 550 something page book, and I've got like just over 100 pages left. So we're reaching the end point. I know I said I wanted to be done with Pitchfork by the time October started, but it's okay. Okay, so I just hit the end of Pitchfork, draft 6. Well, it's not really the end of draft 6, but I reached the end of the manuscript. Of course, in true Sydney fashion, there are still some things that I would have to go back and fix. One of those being a scene that I took out, I still never put back in, so I have to do that in order for the rest of that plot that it belongs to have continuity, obviously. Another thing I have to do is I changed one aspect of the story from something took 5 years, but now it only takes 3. So I have to go back and adjust any time that is mentioned, anytime there's a reference to how long it took. I have to adjust like the dates and like the timeline for that. And there's probably a couple other things I can't remember, but I didn't say it's the 4th of October, Monday. It's 5:39 p.m. So, yay, I'm happy. I changed the ending. It's quite different, which means that it's going to lead into things being different for the next book, but in a good, like I'm excited about it. However, I'm not going to be writing the second book right now. That's not where I feel my energy needs to be spent. I guess the question is, do I go back and change these things now that need to be changed, or do I give up and do it in the future? I'm in the headspace right now. I should just go change at least a couple of those things now. There was 1 or 2 not even continuity errors. Like, you kind of realize something is not realistic, or you realize that a character would have acted differently, but
those particular changes, they're not major in this particular case. I don't feel like I'm going to fix that right now. You know, I feel like that's the kind of thing, like if anybody ever reads this in the future and tells me that this is an issue, or even if I just have the chance in the future to go back and change some things, then I'll probably change that as well. But I think for now I'll just kind of maybe add a line or two to sort of not fix it, but like put a band-aid on it so it's fine. It's fine. It's not fixed, it's not perfect, but it's fine for right now. This draft came out to 116,898 words. So I think all in all, I don't know exactly where I started, but I don't think I added more than like 2,000 words. And I took out some scenes. Hello from my spice cabinet. That's where you are. So today is Thursday, October 7th. It's like 10:22 in the morning, and I do have work today, but I haven't made myself breakfast yet. So I figured I would just chat to you while I make myself breakfast, take a quick break from work. Writing update. That is a lot of cereal. I'm gonna put some back. Today, like I said, today is Thursday, and on Tuesday, I believe it was, after I rewrote the ending, the plan was to go back through and look at all the comments I left myself while I was reading the draft, and also just notes that I'd taken about things that needed to be fixed. Like for example, I had a plot point that I had to move one scene. I wanted to move it later in the draft so that plot didn't start till later in the draft, but then I never found a good place to put that scene, so I never went back and like put the scene in. That's the microwave. I also have the washer machine going, if you hear that knocking about. But then I was looking at all the changes, all the comments and stuff, and I was like, I can't be bothered to make these changes right now. And it got me thinking how in the past I have a habit of like making changes in my drafts for the sake of change. And I always thought that I was just doing that just to keep things fresh, when really what I should be doing is putting those ideas towards completely new projects, just, you know, moving on. But I realized in the last couple of days that one of the reasons that I make changes is because these drafts, a lot of what's in there has been written like in previous drafts. It's been written months or even years ago, and so the writing is different than how I would write now. Because some scenes carry through drafts, then you end up with like scenes, the entire story is basically like, this scene was written, you know, last month, this scene was written 5 years ago, and everything in between, and it's like you have all these different writing styles within one draft. And so when I make these changes for the sake of changes, I'm also making them for the sake of giving myself the opportunity to write something new, write significant chunks of the story from scratch, so that way more of the draft is written in a more recent writing style of mine, if that makes sense. And I realized that that's what I think I've been doing subconsciously, is just trying to bring the draft up to standard. And yeah, I could rewrite the entire scenes where the same kind of things happen, but like I'm rewriting it in my current writing style. But like, one, I can't be bothered. Two, it just kind of feels pointless to do that at this stage, you know? My cereal is just sitting in here. Hold on. I just want to side note address the fact that yes, I do microwave my cereal, okay? Because I like it soggy, and that's just like the quickest way to do it. Anyway, now that you've gotten over that weird habit of mine, yeah, so anyway, reading the Once and Future Witches, and it's making me think a lot about Stormcloud. This usually happens when I'm reading a book. Like, I'll start thinking about one of my own stories that it reminds me of in some way. And so I'll be like, okay, well, I start thinking about what one of my college creative writing professors said, and that was like, when you read a story, like, look for what you can steal. And what she meant by that was not like to plagiarize the story, but to look for certain elements, like, oh, I like the way this author developed this character, or, oh, I like this particular aspect of the world building. There's a lot of sunlight coming into my apartment right now. You know, so you look for those things, so that way, I mean, this is just what you do when you're a reader and a writer. You study stories. And so that's what I'm doing with Once and Future Witches. It reminds me of Stormcloud in some ways. So I'm like, well, what are some parts of this that I could like take and see how I could implement them into my story? Once and Future Witches does something which I was trying to do with Stormcloud, and it does it really well. So I'm like, okay, I'm looking to see how she's doing this and seeing like, okay, how can I develop this further in my story? And so it had me thinking about that, and so that made me want to start working on Stormcloud yesterday.
Later today, once I'm done with work, I'm going to go to the post office because I have a couple of things to mail. And then I'm going to see if I can work on Stormcloud or maybe even Hotel Story. And just, I don't know what I want to do right now as a writer. Half the time I'm thinking, well, I should pick a project and stick with it. But the other part of me is like, oh, but writing for me right now is just about having fun. And if I'm not having fun with a particular story, or I'm starting to feel like I want to work on a different story, then I should be able to allow myself to do that. But then I go back to the, oh, well, I should pick a project and stick with it, or else I'll never get anything done. Which is true. I'm honestly surprised that I even pushed through the entire draft of Pitchfork without picking up Hotel Story or Stormcloud. That in itself is an achievement for me in the last couple of years. Wow, I'm looking at my hair and this part is like, it's uneven because when I was blow drying it, I didn't blow dry this side as straight and I still went outside like this. I was at Barnes & Noble today. It is Monday, Indigenous Peoples Day, and I had the day off from work, so of course, naturally, I went to Barnes & Noble. I'm having a flashback to my vlog last year where I actually did the same thing. No surprises there. I am a creature of habit. So I went to the grocery store afterwards. So I'm about to prepare some vegetable soup. But I just wanted to chat with you briefly about what I worked on at Barnes & Noble today. Oh, you're also in my spice cabinet, so welcome back. And just disregard the hair. It's so obvious in the camera, but I did not notice that earlier. At Barnes & Noble today, so before I even went, I already knew that, I mean, like, ever since I finished Pitchfork, I've been having trouble trying to pick my next project. Going between Stormcloud and Hotel Story, and I won't regale you with the woes of my indecision. But I will say that I ultimately decided on Stormcloud because that's just the one I feel more attached to at the moment. So after going through my notes, creating a new outline document, I ultimately figured out a path forward. So I reworked the first chapter. I kind of honed in on it. So like I was very immersed in that one chapter, trying to figure, like I started reading through it and I was like, what exactly is her motivation here? You know, like what is driving her? And what I thought was her motivation was at odds with what her actions were. And I'm like, well, they should align unless there's a good reason as to why not. So I basically went back from the beginning. I took up my notebook and I basically wrote down in my notes, like, okay, how to make this chapter more interesting. So I had watched a video that Shaylin Wrights did where she talked about some of the best writing advice that she heard, and one of the things was to always ask how to make this more interesting. You know, like raising the stakes and introducing certain elements of the story. Hey, sorry, it's a few minutes later. I have now since washed all my vegetables for the stew. My husband says that the hair doesn't look that noticeable, but I feel like I notice it very anyway. So with chapter 1, I wanted to also introduce certain elements of the story sooner into the chapter and also take out some extraneous elements that either A, don't need to be mentioned because they are not really relevant. I realized also like how it normally takes me 45 minutes to an hour or so to get into the vibe to work. About 45 minutes to an hour in is usually when my tea gets cool enough to drink. And then the caffeine, if there's caffeine in the tea, like also kind of hits me at that point. Gosh, my eyes are already starting to burn. Should I use this whole onion? I'm making a huge pot of soup, so it's that time of year, folks. So it's Tuesday, October 12th. I'm here in the conference room. It's 4:16 p.m. And I want to work on chapter 2 of Stormcloud. I don't know if I have the mental capacity to do it, if I'm being completely honest, but if I don't do it today, I may not get the chance to do it tomorrow. The day after that, I have a therapy appointment. So yesterday when I went to Barnes & Noble on my day off, the reason I went there, I realized is that, you know, sometimes you really just need to be somewhere familiar and comfortable, because when I go to a new cafe, and as much as I love the idea of going to new cafes, I rarely go to new cafes because, one, I'm such a creature of habit. Like, once I find my place, I kind of just like to stick with it. And two, when I go to these new cafes, like, I don't know what the parking situation is like. I don't know if I'm going to like it there. You know, like, I just have all these things where it's like, you have to figure this. Like, of course, you have to go to new places and try new things because you might find a new favorite. But sometimes it's just like,
And also it's just a distraction, I feel like, trying to get situated in a new cafe. It's like I'm uncomfortable because it's not familiar. So these are some afternoon thoughts that I'm having. I'm going to try to sit with chapter 2 and figure out kind of what I want with it. Yesterday in Barnes & Noble, I had my story journal sitting out in front of me while I was working on the chapter. And it was nice to kind of just like be writing or reading or whatever, typing. And then I would think about something and I need to basically flush out an idea. And so I just go right to my notebook, which is already open right in front of me. Like, this is the setup, okay? I just feel like it encourages me to open my notebook a bit more. Yesterday, when I finished the writing session, I wrote a note for chapter 2, just kind of like what I want to happen by the end. So I have to figure out how to channel that.